Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This is Michael, and today we have Dr. Michael McDowell on the show. This podcast is about sharing raw truth and offering real testimonies. And today we have Mike McDowell. One of the problems that we have in our society for veterans, especially veterans issues, veterans needs, is veterans suicide. The average studies out there are saying that it's anywhere from 22 to 40 a day. And so what I wanted to do is give Mike McDowell an opportunity to come on the podcast and share his experience. You are a veteran of the military as well. I believe that you were in the United States Marines. Is that correct?
I was the only branch of service in the United States military. I wear my colors proud. Of course, I'm the only one with a background, as we've talked about before, that doesn't have a massive "I love me" section behind me. But I'll work on that.
All right. So I want to go ahead and just transition this over to you to Mike. I'd love to hear how you got to where you got. I mean, tell us where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about your family, how you decided to join the Marines, all that. If you could just jump right in, I'd love to hear your story.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate your guys' mission. You really have a heart for not only just currently serving service members, but also our veterans that have put their paw in the air and taken the oath of office. So thank you for what you're doing in your journey. And uh, I'm a man of faith, and I think that it's very, very important to
Amen.
to be adventurous, right? I think that's what God calls us to be, particularly with Abraham, and finding, the promised land, and we're trying to figure that out. So thank you. But I'm probably the luckiest guy in the world. I've done everything. It seems like, I mean, I've had a very, very diverse career. I was a kid growing up in a small town in La Grande, Oregon, which is a town of about 11,000 or so.
Okay.
Didn't have a Walmart back in the day. Of course, like every community has one now, but it was probably the greatest. I reflect this back in a lot of my childhood friends. Probably the best gift that I was ever given. Obviously, having two great parents, didn't have they were pretty much blue collar, and really learned the everyone waves to each other, and if you don't, that's a problem because that shows you're hiding
Okay.
something. And
All right.
so that's kind of where I grew up, and it would really shape me who I am today in terms of hard work. No one owes you anything, and uh, I made everything myself in terms of um, in terms of prosperity and any types of ideas that I had. And I was a kid growing up wanting to get out of town, right? Small town in the mountains. It's a beautiful place. Of course, as an adult, you want to go back, but I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. And basketball was a way I did that as a college basketball player. I went to Florida with a coach that I knew very, very well. His son was one of my best friend. They're both of his brothers are in my wedding, and back in 1993. And
Okay.
so I went to Florida, had that great experience culturally, and Warner University, and played there for 3 years, and then went to Eastern Montana, which is
What
Montana,
division is
USA.
that? What division school is that?
It's NAI. Uh, it's NAI, and then when I left there, I went up to Eastern Montana, which is NCAA Division II. It's in the Pac West Conference, and
What position did you play, Mike?
I was a guard, 6'3", off guard. Did a lot of shooting. I was fortunate enough to, I think scored over 2,200 points during my college career. So I never took a shot I didn't like. And I say that jokingly, played no defense. Of course, my coach would probably tell you that. I figured if everybody on the court can outscore their opponent, we win. So that's kind of how
Yeah.
I looked at that. So I just shot every time I got the ball, but jokingly, but made a few. And but more importantly was the team success that we had, and building a program, and being a part of that. So I love the game. It was something I always wanted to do. When I got out, I played overseas. Went with Athletes in Action over to Brazil, Bolivia. Played in China.
Oh, wow.
This was
How
back
long how
in
long did you play in China?
mid early '90s. Well, just it was summer camps, term
Okay.
tours, stuff like that. So really had a great opportunity culturally seeing other parts of the world, and that kind of went hand in hand. I was a high school coach. I was an English teacher for a while, and was at Baker High School. I was in Montana for 1 year, and then transferred to Baker High School in Baker City, Oregon, and was the varsity basketball coach when I was 25, and kind of turned the program around there. Had some some neat stuff, and then went to Northwest Nazarene University. And like, I had an aspiration of being a college basketball coach. That's what I always wanted to do,
Huh.
and build programs and be around the game. Just love the game. And so anyway, so I got a job at Northwest Nazarene. Was there for 3 years at NNU in 2000. I left. Joined the Marine Corps after that.
How old were you when you joined the Marine Corps?
I was 30 years old.
Oh
So
wow,
I
so you came
was
in right at the limit to
yeah,
become a physician.
I had to actually have a waiver actually.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool.
What
You
gave
know,
you the motivation to join the Marines? So you're doing this basketball thing. You want to be a basketball coach,
yeah,
and what you just couldn't find, like you couldn't find an internship, you couldn't find an assistant type of role. Like what how do you think God, manipulated that situation?
yeah. No, I think it's a great opportunity to share that because I believe, as you believe, everything happens for a reason, right? That's
Yeah.
synchronicity, and you can look and choose to how things happen to you, whether that's in your control or not. I went through a divorce with my wife. We had 2 kids at the time.
Yeah.
And so I needed structure and I
Okay.
couldn't find a job. They changed my job when we went from NAI Division two to NCAA Division two. They had to make my job a full-time sports information job because I was doing SID for 1/4 or 1/3 of it. I was coaching as an assistant coach, and then I was an associate professor in the kinesiology department. So they made my job a full-time SID job. So they asked me if I wanted it. And of course, I said no. Doesn't fit my aspirations. And so then went looking for a job and just couldn't find one. Went all over the country with JC, assistant jobs. Really willing to go anywhere, but just didn't get one. And as difficult that was, I was like, well, my wife and I went through the divorce, and it was like,
Yeah.
um, I need structure. I needed something, and I love the military. I always did. I was, as an athlete, and this,
Oh
it's
yeah.
kind of who you are and being a part of a team. So I was like, I'll just do it for 4 years. Went to officer candidate school. Went to Quantico, and like everybody else, I was in the winter class, which is a wonderful way to start your
Oh yeah.
2001 as January 2001 when I get out there in the middle of zero dark nothing
Oh yeah.
and on the parade deck and the winds blowing off the Potomac at about 33 degrees, and just freezing yourself to death and you're just going, what did I get myself into? And everybody laughs at that because as you're
Oh
laughing,
yeah.
we've all been there. So
Yeah.
but I really very, very challenging time for me in terms of that expectation. And I was sharing with another college coach the other day. I actually officiate college and high school basketball. That's something I've done for the last 20 some years. And so I had coffee with one of the coaches, real nice guy
Yeah.
here locally in San Antonio, and we were talking about trying to create something for his program. Kind of an indoctrinational, beginning of the season team building evolution, and there's all sorts of different ones. I used to do this at Edson Range when I was in Camp Pendleton with USC's tennis team, and we did a bunch of other people for local high school teams. They loved it. So you put them through these challenge courses, whatever. But I was sharing with him. I said that the difference is you can't really bring the experience of the military to businesses. I know a lot of business people say, "Oh, teach us how to be leaders," and you become, these consultants of their military guys come in and they talk to their teams but I don't think you can reach that achievability because they don't understand it doesn't, team building and cohesion doesn't happen because of words. It comes through adversity, and it's a shared adversity, shared misery. That's what brings the cohesion. And the military creates a very unique sociological model because you come in from something you were prior into, and I'm not assuming that you're a prior, assuming you've never been involved in that
Yeah.
environment. So you're going cold stick into the sociological model that is where it's very regimented, everything's done for you, but you have no efficacy in doing so. I was, I think that's the part, and I was talking to my friend Chris, the coach I was telling you about. I said that's probably the part that stuck with me so much
Yeah.
because I was always good at what I did. I'm not very athletic. I work extremely hard in skill development. And as a player, I would shoot 400 or 500 shots a day. As a kid growing up, that's what I did. I didn't have much life, but I lived in a small town. I mean, you just shoot, 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 shoot.
Mm.
And people were wondering why you're successful. It has nothing to, it's just repetition. It's repetition and good fundamentals. and then over time, you match that to perfection as you want it to be,
Yeah.
and that could be, you know, a vocational trait. I mean, you could do whatever. But the thing was, is that when I went to OCS, I was literally swept off my feet in terms of efficacy. I had zero. I had so much self-doubt in a period of
Mhm.
10 weeks of OCS that I was like, I hope I can do this. I mean, I literally was like, I really, really hope that I have what it takes to do this because I don't think I'm going to make it. And they
Mhm.
thrash you, as you know, through officer candidate school, where it's different than boot camp because you're running more. You're on your feet more. You're putting on more stress in terms of leading and doing things in small groups. You're billet now, you're the commander, you're the first sergeant, or you're whatever you are, and you're like, I've never done this before, and now I'm thrown into this model with stress. But I got to tell you that that was really the defining moment for me in terms of a 10-week period that changed my life, because
Yeah.
when that happened, you learn that you can really get through anything. Now, you can't replicate combat operations, which is something, as you and I both know, that happened after 9/11, as we deployed time and time and time and time again. That has its own challenge, but the initial experience, the baseline experience of the indoctrinational process is really, I think, critical to framing and forming what we have as terms of a brother and sisterhood. It is unlike anything you'll ever experience, as you know, in the private sector. You can try, you can certainly do team building events. You can have a great centered. We hire vets. Okay, great. But you're still not going to have that 24/7. You get a call from the first sergeant, such and such. Got in a car accident, or
Yeah.
something happened. It's just, and you don't even bat an eyelash. All right, it's at 1 in the morning. Let's go down and let's make sure he's safe. And you know, and that doesn't happen as we continue to go through. So all that said, went through that experience, became a commissioned officer, went to artillery school, Fort Sill,
Oh
and
yeah. You know what? That's
so
funny because I totally forgot. I totally forgot that we were both gun bunnies. Um,
yeah, God
that
loves us even more. With
I
God's
mean,
gun. That's.
we were meant to meet, Mike. We were absolutely meant to meet.
Yep. And so Latin America, man, you really haven't lived until you've gone to Latin America.
How about
So
the
it was,
water? Listen, for anybody who's
I,
never been to Lawton, Oklahoma before, or anywhere in that silt type of atmosphere, oh my gosh, the
yeah.
water. Like when I remember when we got off the bus and we went in and we got a drink of water for the first time. It was literally like I felt like I was drinking sand. And that's how thick the water was with whatever is in it. I don't
Uh,
understand it, but hey. Do you
I
remember
just
those days?
remember, I mean, it was a good 6 months, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sadly, it was right after 9/11. I mean, I was at
Mhm.
Quantico when 9/11 happened, and
Yeah.
was actually out during the evening, came back through the Pentagon the night before it actually got hit. And of course, that's the thing that changed everything, right? So 9/11 already happened there. So it was like I checked in November. We graduated in October from OCS, or the basic school. So anyway, I just went 6 months over there, and I ended up. My wife and I actually got back together. This was about just south of 2 years separated, so we ended up, or divorced, and then we got remarried in February of that year. So it was kind
How
of a
did that
cool
happen?
experience. Well, I mean, you. I mean, I don't. It's about forgiveness. I can just tell you that. I
Yeah.
can tell you that it's about putting God center in your life. I think
Yeah.
because you can't do it unless you are. And you had children, right? I mean, that was the other thing. We had two young kids at the time, and I think 8 and 6 were about their ages, and it was just get off yourself. And I knew that I would never see them. I mean, that was the other piece. I knew that they would be separated from me because I was going over to Pendleton after that. So I knew, she was in Illinois at the time, and
Oh, go
I
figure. That's
just
where I'm
didn't.
living now.
Yeah.
What
So
part of Illinois were they at?
the at that time, it was just south suburbs, Homewood Flossmoor area. Was actually she went to HF High School, I think, and I know that's where she went. And her parents have since moved. Her father passed away, but they're in Arizona. And her sister, who's actually visiting us here in San Antonio right now, she lives in Joliet, so she goes back and forth to Arizona. So that was one of the things. I think it was really a neat blessing. We had another child, who's now 21 years old, and seems like last week when that happened. But anyway, so then got in with Second Battalion Life Marines, ended up, learning the skill set, being an FO. I was an FO. Initial order came out 2003. We're, of course, at the parade deck, all ready to go. General Mattis, was our big boss, and Colonel Marletto, and such great, Marine leaders as a second lieutenant. You getting ready, and this is what you train for, right? And we've been in the desert so many times already prior to this, as it was ramping up, and
Wait, you did your
uh,
training in the desert?
well, it was Twin at Palms. We were back and forth a few times prior to that, and then I was with Second Battalion, Fifth Marine, so I was with an infantry battalion during the initial push. So I was chopped to those guys. So I was back and forth to Victorville and some other Mout stuff, because of course that was before the TTPs really were continually written, until what they are now in terms of
Yeah.
Fallujah, Ramadi, and all the other things that we learned from, built off the Vietnam guys who just did a great, phenomenal job with what they had. And of course, we just continued that book as it was developed with how we handle urban operations, and not just Mount, but other types of build outs with that in terms of collateral damage and fire support and all that. So anyway, so I deployed them with the initial push, and then I did 6 total deployments. Not all of them were in Afghanistan
Oh
and
my.
Iraq. I did 2 PACOM tours with 31st MU, which was worked with uh, Colonel Miller at the time, but General Lee Miller, who was I think he retired as a 2-star, I believe. I actually ran into him at CENTCOM, just kind of ironic, on my last tour. I worked for General Austin as his targeting guy with all the ISIL things back in 2015.
So you actually got to actually stay in field artillery. They didn't retrain you to be military police or anything like that. You were actually able to
No,
stay.
it's civil affairs. I was cross-thread with that. General Mattis had that. Our secondary mission was always civil affairs. So I did do a tour over there in Afghanistan, where we was Second Battalion, Eighth Marines, and also Third Battalion, Sixth Marines, up in Marja. It was a very kinetic area. 2A took a lot of casualties. We lost, I think, 12 guys total. I think in that battalion they had 33 amputees. So,
Oh
so those
my.
are really personal things
Yeah.
that drive me to this day, right? And uh, losing your own people, right? Uh, that you've trained, and that's your brother, right? We
Yeah.
had we had a couple females that were part of our FET team, which were great. But most of them that I had were we trained together. And when they have massive injuries like they do from IEDs and other things, because it was so kinetic, that stuff shapes you, and you can't come home a little. I don't see how people can come home without being a bit disjointed, as much as we attempt to do that. Even with and it leading to self-medication, other type of things that as we know,
Yeah.
are very challenging. So anyway, so going back, so that I had those deployments, um, and then retired in 16. Prior to 16, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I had the GI Bill, obviously, and so I was a major at the time, and started school at USC, University of Southern California, and ended up going to get my MBA program there. So I did that because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I really wanted to teach or not coming out once I was done. But anyway, just I had the time in the B billet that I was in over at EWTG PAC, so I was going every other weekend, up there up to San Diego. We were living in Temecula at the time. So anyway, so that's kind of my thing in terms of my MBA degree. I got my MBA in 2015, and then 2015 I was, well, 15 actually. I was actually at CENTCOM, and then the early out came out, the Terra, which was the temporary early retirement opportunity. President Obama was in charge at that time of this POTUS, and I looked at the math on it. I was in zone for lieutenant colonel, and I kind of wanted to. I didn't want to relieve the military as a major. I mean, I just because I was like, I want to be a lieutenant colonel. I like to give battalion command an opportunity. I'd had so many different tough jobs.
Yeah.
I thought I could be competitive, whether or not I was or not. But I knew I could probably at least make the rank, and then I was going to retire 20 years and be 50 years old when I retired. And I just looked at the math on it. I figured I had an MBA. I think I get a job, probably make the same amount of money. I didn't really know. It was like say 2015, 2016. So I decided, well, we decided to pull the trigger, and we got all the benefits, reduced perpetuity, and they were getting rid of artillery guys, they were getting rid of frog guys because the Osprey, intern, and they didn't want to retrain those guys. Obviously, they were already senior, so they offered the carrot, and I took it at 16 years, and was really kind of glad I did. I mean, everything happens for a reason, right? And
Absolutely.
so I got in a nonprofit world at USC. I moved to Los Angeles um, in 2000. It was right after I retired, and we did the ceremony. Uh, it was May. It was yeah, it was May 2016 because I was on terminal. Because my EAS is actually July 31st or August 1st, wherever you look at it in 2016. So we left, sold our house, had a little bit of money, went to Los Angeles, bought a house in Burbank, and got involved at USC. I was working with the Cohen Military Family Grant. They give us 16 million to help people with mental and behavioral health needs. And I never really got into, I'm not a provider, but I was an associate director, and really started examining this problem. And I had PTS. Uh, Pretty good, and I was getting help. I was taking meds at the time, and it was very, very, and I didn't want to be that guy, right? I was like, you're tougher than this. Don't be relying on meds for the rest of your life, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And I was just finding a difficult time. My wife and I were really at each other's edge. She was like, you got to get yourself fixed. You've got to you're on edge all the time. And I was smarter than the average bear, I guess, because I don't self-medicate. I'm more of a guy that wants to go exercise or something rather than, I don't really drink. I'll have a beer from time to time, but I don't really drink. And so that was never a factor. Although I've seen that, because again, as a person in mental health, I was seeing that behavior. That's why they were there. They were alcoholics, or they were self-medicating with dope, or whatever they were doing to take the edge off so they could sleep. And so I knew better than that, but I was getting to the point where I was just agitated all the time. I didn't like, people would drive through my neighborhood fast, and I would literally carry racquetballs with me in my pockets, and I would throw the balls at their cars. I mean, it was getting to the point where it was like I was so agitated, I just want to hurt somebody for hurting other people, right? Because they're going to drive too fast and they're going to hit a
Yeah.
kid, and I want to do terrible things to you, right? And
It's
so,
interesting how you took the protectionary role, because when I think about what you said earlier about watching your own soldiers pass away, it's almost like it manifested into this thing where you had to try to protect other people. You were hyper vigilant to protect your neighborhood. And it's interesting because I had a lot of similar experiences in my own way in my own neighborhood of trying to like call CYF because there was this lady who was not watching her kids. And I didn't really connect the dots until afterwards that I've always been very protectionist about for kids, especially. But it really manifested like my mental health illness really, like I hyper focused with my PTSD on, other people's issues and not taking care of their kids.
no, and that's one of the things I came back and probably abused my kids in that way, because when we were seeing busloads of kids get shot and killed, I mean, literally, where they were coming through the line, didn't stop at our checkpoints, and we were engaging them with 50 cals and 240 Golfs, and then it would be pitch black at night. They wouldn't stop. We'd have pin flares and we'd be shooting them up, and it turns out that they were just busloads of kids that
Oh
were,
yeah.
and old people, and we were going over there, and I was seeing them as we're pulling them off, the ones that were still alive. They're aspirating, red blood, and they're, how do you see that and
Yeah.
and then not come home, and like, my kids, who were, again, they were probably 10 years old, 10 and 8, maybe 11 7, 11 9, that age,
Yeah.
that period. And we had the new one. Obviously, he was 1 or 2, but it was like, hey, Dad, I want to go spend the night at such and such house. I'm like, no, you can bring them over to our house. We'll
Yep.
do it here.
Oh yeah.
And so that was very, it's abusive, although it's not a physical abuse. It's a
That's,
controlling abuse that
yeah.
is not sustainable over time. So again,
Right.
it just starts it just starts building on you. And so anyway, so
So back to where we were before the Zoom meeting decided to close on us. Um, where we were at was it really actually kind of an important moment, because it's interesting how Mike, when you shared your experience, it immediately brought back my same experience where I was at a checkpoint um, in Iraq, right north of Baghdad. We had the same type of situation where it was dark. We had our serpentine set up because we were supposed to be screening people in and out of the roads. There was a lot of theft going on at the time. So, we are in a sense trying to be the police because they didn't really have much of a police force there in Iraq at that time. I was there from 2004 through 2005, and that was a real hot spot time as we had transitioned over there for the war on terror. And we experienced the same thing. We ended up having to shoot people that, after all the bullets were done flying, we get over there and I had to be the combat medic to try to help patch the wounds for these guys who didn't in fact have any wounds. They didn't in fact have any guns, and they were just trying to, they were paranoid because they had gotten attacked by their own citizens to steal their stuff. And so here we were, shooting up, in essence. When we say innocent, I mean innocent in the sense that they were just innocently trying to get out of that situation. They didn't understand what was going on. And so now it's interesting, Mike, how we both had the same experience. But so go ahead from that point. So you came back, you had the PTSD, and you were trying to manage it, navigate it with your children, and you were overprotection. I think that's where we left off.
Yeah, and so I went to see the provider. I was still at EWTG PAC, and ultimately just walked through that process with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and which is one of many modalities, short-term modalities that we offer service members: cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, EMDR, all these other evidence-based practices. And so kind of learned strategies with it. But it was interesting because I didn't really, I wanted to get in the business world. That was the whole point of getting the MBA. And it was funny how I just kept getting nonprofits in this space, and it was like I had enough of a problem myself to really understand it,
Yeah.
with other brothers and sisters that went through it. And it's like, fine, I have it, but I'm not going to let it define me. I'm not going to be, it's not going to be my crutch, and I'm going to find different ways to support it. And of course, now I am, a year or two out of service, in LA. I actually, I left the Soldiers Project, or with the Cohen Military Family Clinic. They pulled the grant out of USC, and then ended up getting a job at the Soldiers Project, which again was in mental and behavioral health. That's kind of my track that I was in as an ED, executive director there. So we knew it was a national program, giving free mental and behavioral health for as long as they needed it, from a lot of psychologists and social workers, psychiatrists in LA. Right, that's where it started. But it was a real broken system because there's not enough providers to go and support this population, because there's no. It's funny because where all the providers are, they're all in Brentwood and Beverly Hills, and they're people who can donate time. Unfortunately, that's not where vets live, and it's not aligned. And so the where they need it is in their poorer areas. They need it up in Lancaster, Palmdale, and I got really involved in Los Angeles County politics, not so much the politics side, but the social work part. I was a veteran commissioner for LA County for several years until I left, and Catherine Barger there, that's the commissioner. Learning a lot about how stuff works in the city in terms of services and stuff. So I learned it was really a broken system. In LA, particularly, we had 88 cities that are incorporated in Los Angeles as we know it.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's the distance. It's where people live and work. Because if from an 8 to 5 period, they're working, they don't have time to go get mental and behavioral health. They might get it after they're done, after work, but then nothing's open. So we were trying to create something really, very unique and innovative in that space, and brings therapists to actually where the service members are in Los Angeles. That was the key, and utilizing existing vertical construction like YMCA's, churches, all these other places where you could do this kind of therapy work in the trenches. But they didn't want to do that. That's not what the therapists were comfortable with. They want to do it in their office where they, they're afraid of getting sued. With I call it, credentialitis. It
Oh yeah.
paralyzes them from doing work. And God bless them for doing it for free. But if it's not available in scale, we really aren't doing them any justice, right, in terms of that. So we all have to take a risk. So anyway, so I left there, got involved with Erwin Deutsch, who Erwin bought the Pecan Valley Golf Course here in San Antonio. So it's an old course, went out of business 2011, 200 acres, and basically we've been trying to build a residential living and learning community in San Antonio as the first one. We want to do this around the country, but it's a place where we can build. We're zoned for 1,400 units of mental and behavioral health, or 1,400 multi-level properties, multi-family properties. So that's our objective. We've been trying to do it since about 2018, 2019. I actually wrote my dissertation on this model, and so I know this model will work. All we have to do is make it financially feasible. It can't be done as I see it right now. I don't think it can be done as a nonprofit. It just costs too much. It's got to make money because otherwise you can't grow it. So the
Mm.
Battle Club is actually a for-profit company, but we link ourselves and time ourselves around nonprofits that will do the work. We won't do the work necessarily. What we'll do is get them to the people that are doing the work. And when you can have a community of over 1,000, 1,500 families or individuals, now it changes the scope of things, because now you can bring in people, HR directors from different companies, Holt Caterpillar, here, Toyota, DeLorean, Navistar, HEB Manufacturing. I mean, this place in San Antonio is blown up. They've got so many companies coming here, and they don't have enough talent. And it's just a rich pool for veterans that are going to be leaving or that are already established in the community. So we
Yeah.
want to be able to bring those people, those partners into our community to then talk and do forums, several times a week. Look for talent. And by the way, as you looked at that data, over half of them have spouses. Guess what? They need work too. So it's a really, really good thing for not only the community in terms of social capital, but now they're going to be employed at not just entry level jobs. They're going to be employed into careers, vocational trades. That's a big thing. Cyber is enormous in the city, and it's only going to get bigger. So this model will work in emerging markets. We try to do it in Los Angeles. It's impossible because the cost of capital is so high, and the land prices are so high, and it would take you 5-6 years just to zone it, with all the regulations that go into it. So we
So
immediately went out to a more, uh, I guess, more flexible state, and a more of an emerging market where there's actually people going to it.
yeah. So Mike, if we could just rewind, because the thing is I don't think the audience or whomever watches this video was privy to our prior conversation, because we talked on the phone for over the better part of an hour, and you really gave me a good explanation of how you define the problem, because I think we had talked about veteran suicide. And
Mhm.
if we could just kind of recapitulate some of that conversation, if you could just rewind a little bit, give us a scope, because I know me personally, I only know the literature briefly, but I really only know my own personal experience when it comes to my
Mhm.
own depressive issues and my own mental health distresses. I've got the comorbid stuff between the physical issues that I've had, as well as the mental health side of things between depression, anxiety, PTSD, all that.
Mhm.
So when we see this number and we hear politicians throwing these ideas out there that there's anywhere between 22 and 40 veterans that are committing suicide a day, can you give us some ideas on how those numbers are made up? You know what I mean? Like, are they
Mhm.
current? Are they former? Are they mostly Vietnam veterans? Like, what is
Mhm.
the literature telling us about who's killing themselves? Like, who's doing it and why?
Well, that's a great point. It's interesting because we really don't know. As we know that it's gone up. We know that it's gone up. We know the population that has. So this is a multi-dimensional problem of practice. You can't just look at it you have to look at it through a didactic lens, right? Through a lengthy lens, because the people that are hurting themselves most by number are older veterans, right? Those
Yeah.
are the ones that are, you know,
The
the
Vietnam.
Vietnam eras, the Korean War vets. But this is a bigger play though, because you look at the why, because why do people hurt themselves? I mean, it could be argued that I could make a case that the ones that are hurting themselves aren't necessarily people with PTSD. Okay, we identify it as PTSD because it's post-traumatic stress, but in actuality, there's a very, very large link of a possibility of what they call moral and ethical injury. Yeah, it's very
Thank you.
different.
Yes. I'm glad
Jonathan
you brought that
Shea,
up.
Dr. Jonathan Shea, who's a well-known psychiatrist, started this issue, this research with veterans, specifically in focus groups back in the Northeast. He was on my board at Soldiers Project, and I had the privilege of just sitting down and talking to him hour after hour, just learning what he's forgotten. Right? I mean, it just literally, if I can do that, I'll be a successful individual. But he's the one that coined the Iliad and Odyssey in Vietnam. He's the one that wrote that book um, about coming out of service and not being able, going to those environments and then coming back out. Now it's not. See, the problem with the DSM-5, and now it's even more. They have another section of the DSM-5 updated version, but there is no diagnosis for moral and ethical injury. It's only PTS, post-traumatic stress.
That's right.
But post-traumatic stress is different than moral and ethical injury, because moral and ethical injury does not include a personal, like PTS. God forbid, a woman or somebody that's small, particularly a woman, because they're more likely to get assaulted sexually than men in terms of
Yeah.
violence.
Oh, sure.
She's in a dark parking lot coming out of the supermarket and is assaulted by two individuals in a darkness. She's thrown in a car, assaulted. Whatever. I mean, that's life, limb, or ISA. That's PTSD. That's trauma. That's a traumatic event in terms of you don't know if you're going to live or die at knife point, right?
Yeah.
But what's happening is, and that's etched in our brains, right? By as far as biokinetically, biologically, in terms of hormone stress, it reshapes the way the brain neurologically and through the cognitive architecture. It's how it changes it. But we're finding that moral and ethical injury is not that. So, for example, I use the example of the bus load of children coming through a checkpoint.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't stop, and you have to neutralize the threat. I mean, NVGs didn't work. They're calling, you're shooting up pin flares, and then you go and experience that. You actually physically go and you're over there trying to get accountability of what happened as an officer. You're looking at that, and you're seeing children who are innocent that are contorted by the bullet fire, torn to shreds, blood everywhere, moaning and begging for mercy. And how do you see that as a father, as a grandfather, and not have that shape you and your being? Well, that's moral and ethical injury. That's not trauma like your life or limbs, was at risk. That is actually my conceptual lens of reality has been reshaped at that moment, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you come home and you overprotect your kids, because you don't, God forbid, anything ever happen like that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's important to understand that the therapies are very different in the recovery of that, and I think David Nash, I think is his name, at UCLA, he was doing some work to try to get moral injury
Yeah.
into the DSM-5 because it's not in there. We just say, well, Mike and Steve and Joe and Evan, Adam, they all have PTSD. Well, they just identify it as that. Well, his argument, his hypothesis was potentially that they use CPT, cognitive processing therapy, in the VA through the system, but that could actually exacerbate it, make it worse. And we're talking about cognitive architecture MRIs that were actually done, where
Yeah.
they can identify physically where the stress point is in
Yep.
terms of the brain reaction to problems and stuff pre-therapy, right? Then what they do is they actually follow that brain scan, and and it doesn't even affect the same part of the brain. It's different. And his argument was that it's actually making it worse. It actually exacerbates it, makes it worse. Now, we're talking about and again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a guy that says, hey, this is a problem, let's run this to ground, right? That's my answer. But how much money does the VA have into CPT, right? As an example, I'm not saying
Oh, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So my thought process is that people who have traumatic, PTS, actually have physical PTS, don't typically hurt themselves. Right? That's not a behavior they do. They do, however, with moral and ethical injury because of shame, because of guilt, because of a moral, ethical
Yeah.
conflict, because they don't want to be a burden to society. That's why they go into the isolation. They isolate. Let me
Yep.
tell you something. PTSD, people who have moral injury go into isolation. That's what Vietnam vets did, because
Yeah.
the less stresses they have in their life, the less triggering moments that they have. Now, moral and ethical injury could also be you're in a firefight with a fire team on a patrol, and and Adam gets shot, and uh, guess what? I couldn't bring him back, because if we would have gone back further and to grab his remains, we'd have gotten killed too. So we had to break contact. So you're living with that for the
Yeah.
rest of your physical life. I didn't bring him home. I didn't take my guys back. I
Yeah.
didn't. And let's say you're in garrison, right? You're my battle buddy. So we go out, and we've got a sister that's going with us, right? The three of us. And
Hmm.
so, or maybe just, whatever. I'm a male female battle buddy. We go to our sergeant's house. We're drinking. We're all underage. The sergeant's not, obviously, but he sexually assaults, the female that we're with, right? And we don't really know what happened. She was gone. We're all, but then you realize, what happened. She gets back. She says, "We got to go now. We got to go." Right. And you're like, what the heck? What's going on? This is a sergeant, this person I put up on a pedestal. And, next thing you know, within a week, she kills herself, in her room. And you're like, I didn't take care of her. I mean, I didn't ask the right questions. That's moral injury. That's legitimately an issue that is affecting a lot of our soldiers to this day. So it's
Well,
something we
yeah.
certainly have to explore more.
So that's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to say. I mean, it sounds like you're postulating that. So out of those numbers, if there's 22 to 40, and it's a range. I mean, my goodness. I mean, to have to go that wide of a range is not necessarily scientific. But if we're saying, just generally speaking, that it's anywhere between 22 and 40 a day, you're suggesting that it's generally the older population of veterans. So Vietnam veterans, Korean veterans, um, that are feeling like they're a burden on society. You know what? It's interesting you mentioned that, because I don't necessarily think that it's only just that generation of fighters, because I would also suggest that there's a blowback effect as well when we find out information like there were. So, for example, I'll give you my testimony. For example, when I came back from overseas, I had multiple issues that I had to address. It wasn't just PTSD. I didn't even know about moral and ethical injury. But at that time, I had something that we would call complex trauma. So I would include moral and ethical injuries into that as well, because it manifested into different coping strategies. And the one that stuck the longest with me was the suicidal depression. And I always, it's interesting because my wife and we got divorced, but, I remember her basically beating that down the door into my office at one point because I was just so secluded. And I remember telling her, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. And so I remember saying those things because it was like, I've been holding on to this baggage, this burden of knowing that it was an unjust war, that there were no weapons of mass destruction, that these citizens that we were supposedly trying to protect, we ended up causing more damage to their lives as a result of our presence being in that particular area. We shouldn't have been patrolling that road at that point in time. There was no reason for us to be shooting innocent people, and so it's hard to try to explain that rationally to your spouse, much less anybody that would be trying to ask you that in an initial interview when you go for behavioral health. And let's just say, for example, I first experienced, I wanted to give this a real life perspective, because when I came back from overseas, this was 2005, I immediately started having heart palpitations, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't understand what it was. And so I just went into my primary care doctor because I was having all of this anxiety and I didn't know what it was. And they hooked me up and did the stress test and all this stuff, but it was actual mental health issues. It wasn't physiological necessarily. It manifested into physiological distress, but it was these mental issues going on. So what I'm supposing, or I'm postulating, is that there's complex traumas. It's not just PTSD, or it's not just anxiety. But it's a complex, especially for these folks that are killing themselves. In my opinion, they realize that they are so far gone that they don't want to be a burden on society anymore. And I think that's where we come to this agreement, this parallel agreement, that they're just
Mhm.
getting to this point where it's easier to just eliminate the threat, which they are the threat, because they
Mhm.
realize that they're just a burden on society. They're just sucking off of the government's money every month. If they have disability, they have no connections. Like for me, for example, I don't have really any contact with my kids. I haven't seen them in a couple of years. The divorce was very bitter, and it was very hard on me and my kids and for the family. And so I ended up being completely alone. It's interesting. I ended up in San Antonio, and that's how I met Bob Perino, who connected me with you, because I was staying at a family of generational military folks right next to the Air Force base, and Bob and I were renting the same type of Airbnb situation. So
He's a great guy.
yeah, he's a great guy, and it's interesting. It's interesting how, if you just look at my life, I'm
Mhm.
also in that same aggregate of
Mhm.
people who were tossed aside, who just fell through the gap. So what have you done? And I think this is a good opportunity for you to talk about the things that you have been working diligently. And I'm so thankful for you, Mike. It's amazing to have met you, because I think there's what Onward Ops, and then there's the Valor Club. So I want to give you an opportunity to bring up. I know you sent me a flyer to go through what it is that how are you defining the problem? How are you treating the problem? And what are you doing specifically to help address these veterans issues that you see specifically in your niche?
No, I'm really sorry you had to go through that. And this is not a compound fracture on your right femur, okay? Where
Right.
it's a direct blow. It's a physician will look at that. They'll establish the appropriate surgery that needs to happen. They'll take 50 years of research of things that they've done through technological advances, and set that bone, and begin the healing process. Now, to what degree you can use that leg, hopefully it's in the 90s and above, that's great. That's a great recovery. But the complexity of mental and behavioral trauma, or moral injury or whatever, I mean, you can have both. That's the complexity of it, and it affects people differently. That's why it's so difficult to master. It's an art, right? There's a science to it, but there's an art. And let's be honest, brother. We're scratching the surface in terms of
That's right.
bioscience, in terms of what brain activity, and MRIs, and being able to understand why things affect certain people but not others. I've heard research that shows with moral injury, those that have a stronger faith prior to deployment, understanding something bigger than themselves,
Yeah.
actually, there's some correlations that they have less moral and ethical injury. So so what does that mean? It means we don't know. I mean, we don't know anything. And it's funny
Yeah.
because you run this thing to ground and you think, okay, you know, are we ever going to stop suicide? No, we're never going to stop suicide. That's a behavioral thing that's impossible to do. But that said, I think we can seriously reduce it if we frame our argument and frame our problem of practice better. Um, and that's one of the reasons I got into what I got into, because when I was doing my doctoral work at USC, I was really trying to understand, the gap analysis. I did a gap analysis dissertation. So what that does is it takes the knowledge, motivation, or organizational influences affecting transitional vets, right? So for example, I studied housing. How big a deal is it, the importance of housing, the importance of meaningful careers and employment, and then resources, right? And so mental and behavioral health, for example. So I use the term KMO, knowledge, motivation, organizational influences. So what we're trying to do is figure out, using research, how what the real problem is, right? So, for
Right.
example, let's just take mental health. And you want to be a police officer. Okay, great. So you're having what you had, and you're dealing with sleeplessness, anxiety. You've had physical, like, oh, am I having a heart attack here? This is no joke. I mean, I can feel my heart beating, and I'm in pain. I'm literally, my neck is, this is a
Hmm.
heart attack, right? So you can't diagnose yourself, but something's not right.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
right.
clear that something. So you have knowledge of that particular thing we're talking about with mental and behavioral health needs. So that's one. So you've got that. Okay, you want to be a cop, great. Sweet. All right. Well, now when it comes to motivation, Okay. Is Adam ready to go to mental and behavioral health? Well, here's the deal. He has to be a police officer. So do you think he knows all about his problems? Do you think he's going to put his hand in the air and want to talk to a psychologist? He's not motivated to do that because it'll affect his employment.
That's right.
So that's a motivational influence. So in that particular case, in this example, that would be the problem is motivation. So you have to interview all your people, your hundreds and hundreds of surveys to know, is there a correlation between that? And then the other one is let's say you want to be a teacher. So for you, you have your knowledge, you got a problem. Motivation, yeah, I don't want to feel like this anymore, and it doesn't affect any of my future. If I don't do it, I'm going to be divorced again, I'm going to lose my kids again, I'm not going to be a great employer or employee, I'm not going to be a good team member, friend, whatever. So then you're like, okay, great. So I want to get the help. And now when we talk about the organizational influences, and that organizational influences, are there therapists around? Okay. Because like I told you before, if you want to be a cop, you got knowledge, you're not motivated, but I have therapists all around your neighborhood for free. I can give it to you. You're not going to go. So now we know that if you're a teacher, and there's no therapist around anywhere where you live, for like an hour from where you live, that's the problem. It's not knowledge, it's not motivation. So that's what I study with the veterans in terms of why some do well and other ones don't. It's not PTS, it's failure to assimilate. That's the problem. It's we don't even know how many people have PTSD. We think between the evidence is very clear. It's about 8 to 18% we think have it. But then the other argument is did Adam and Mike have it prior to us going in the military? Were we sexually assaulted as kids? Were we abused prior to coming in? Because you ever wonder why some people get PTSD and they never deployed? It's stress induced is what it is.
Oh,
So
for
if they
sure.
have
Sure.
if they have unresolved issues coming into
Yeah.
service, those things are going to manifest themselves and they're going to get a diagnosis of PTSD, and then they're either going to med sep or they do 4 years successfully and they get out. And so we don't even know. I mean, it's such it's a throwing a spitball on the wall. So those are things that we have to continue in our policy making, right? We say again, it goes back to talking out of both sides of our mouth. Well, the first question we ask you, you remember going to MEPS or whatever we were doing, have you ever seen mental and
Oh yeah.
behavioral health?
Yeah.
If you want to join the service, what are you going to say?
Right.
No, because I don't want anybody to know my stuff.
Yeah.
But yet that's a discriminator. But yet
Yeah.
we talk and say, well, we want you to get help, Mike. We want you to do. Well, you really don't, because if you did, you think of the battalion commander, I would go see, psycho mental and behavioral health and have that in my medical records,
No, yeah.
and
It's
on
interesting.
that board.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
it's a discriminator.
no, you're
You
you're
know.
100% right on that. And I think that's part of so underrepresentation of the issue is obviously part of the problem. I mean, if we have a self-preserving, it's really an instinct. It's a self-preservation instinct to not tell people our problems, because if we do that, it'll prevent us from potentially getting the resources that we need, or access to the resources that we need to be able to stay employed. I can tell you, Mike, from my personal experience, that I lost many jobs because I didn't tell them my problems. I never was able to really truly self-advocate and say, yeah, I've got some problems here, or I have PTSD, or I have this, or I have that. And I had no training, or little to no training, on how to self-advocate like that up front, and just tell people, hey, look, I have this, I have that, and I have this. I remember specifically my boss even telling me at one point, like, why didn't you just say, hey, this or this or that? And it's like, I love this idea that you're mentioning, that there's a little to no transition from going from your military experience to coming back to overseas. And I fell through the cracks. So I was in the National Guard, so I don't know if it would have been any better if I was active duty. um you know Maybe there would have been more eyes on you potentially if I was active duty, but I know from my experience that we deployed so many soldiers during that time period that a lot of us fell between the cracks and didn't transition well back home. And I remember even the first few months of my mom basically saying, there's something wrong with you. And I'm just like, I don't even know what's wrong with me. How am I supposed to
They
explain
can't
that?
even sell. Well, and again, go back to camo. You didn't have a knowledge of it, right? I mean,
Right.
you didn't. What's wrong with me? I mean, I'm fine. And then,
Yeah.
of course, it's very complex. So in doing all that, I
Yeah.
saw what was going on. Again, I had my background in therapy, in mental behavioral health. Again, I'm not a provider, but a researcher, obviously, in social
Yeah.
science, and as a leader, and I was running these programs. I was like, well, they're not getting the support to help the need. I mean, even if we try to create and get rid of these barriers. So all that said, I thought to myself, how can we create something innovative, something that we can do that is timely, that's preventative, that saves money, and that really gets ahead of the problem. Because the way that the thing was set up, when I was looking at transitioning vets, when we're looking at people leaving the service, and the way the policy is written by the DoD, we have no way of knowing who you are. See, that's the problem. Because you got 45,000, I think there's almost 50,000 nonprofits registered 501c3s in this country. You won't realize that. Those are 990s that they have to fill out annually. Okay, that's how many serve this population. And I would argue that many of them are they can't scale, and they're really a month from insolvency in terms of financial insolvency. What do? They don't keep track of data. Okay, and if the data is done, it's not done in such a way that it's shared, right? No one has the information and can feed off that and build off that, because they operate in silos. Because let's be honest, if they share their data, then they ruin their opportunities to get funding in terms of private funding, not
Right.
grants necessarily, but through donors and that kind of stuff, because they've got to be relevant. What I found, they have to be relevant. What's important, I found as an executive director in mental and behavioral health, is there's no good news story. It's not like I can market your success unless you come on TV and talk about your problems, how you've successfully gotten through it. And we've had a few people that do that, but we don't have a brand. The brand is never, it's always done in silence. And therapists don't do what? They're not at law to talk about it. They
That's
can't
right.
talk about your diagnosis. Now, I was being able to pull data from them in terms of how many hours they've served, in terms of support, all the volunteer therapists, but that's not telling me if we're getting better. So you've got to look at data as a way of driving
That's a
your
good
ops.
point. That's a really good
So,
point.
and I got that. This is a true story. And I can't remember exactly. I think it was Walter Reed. I was and it was on a soldiers project, and this was one of the things that was one of those pivotal moments that said, I'm going to fix this. So I'm going to say we collectively, the whole entire society. So he calls me. It was like an 8 o'clock in the morning phone call. I never forget it. The guy, I don't remember his name, but he said, my name's Dr. Such Such, and I just want to talk to you, and I just want to really congratulate you. We're looking at your data, and you have the best suicide prevention rates that we've seen, with what you're doing across the country with all these therapists in all the United States. And I said, well, that's great. That's great news. And I said, but there's a problem with that. And he's like, what's that? I said, I can't confirm nor deny it. I don't know. How do you know this? Because I don't
Right.
have the data. And is it because, well, Adam called me. I mean, he hurt himself last night. Well, if that doesn't get reported, how do I know that as a therapist? I don't report. You just don't show up. Think about that. He just, by the way, he didn't show up at his next therapy appointment, which is all decentralized, right? It's all over it's all over the city. I don't know your relationship with your therapist. You just didn't show up anymore. So how would they even know that they killed themselves? How the therapists even know? So it's important to understand that if you don't have the data up front, okay, in terms of preventative health care, we all know it's cheaper. It's way less money. However, preventative health care is often hard to monetize. That's the problem. So, for example, we have to get upstream from this problem. We can't do it in the end, because if you come out of service and you've got a problem, and I mean the water level is right there, okay, and
Hmm.
you are going to call a nonprofit of choice, whoever that you think that is, you call. Well, first of all, unless you call, I wouldn't even know you exist, right? You
That's
tell
right.
me your name, you tell me where you live, you're going to come in, you want to get some therapy, whatever. Great, good on you. The problem is now you're incarcerated, you're living in your car, you don't have a job, your kids are now split up, or you're trying to just protect them. And mental health is number 17 on the priority list.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get through the night without being assaulted, in a South Central LA neighborhood. Okay, for example. So that in of itself is a problem. So for me, we have to tell the DoD, and we've had really good success there. General Mike Eastman, who I think he's been out about 2 years, just south of 2 years, he's directing Onward Ops. That organization has specifically been able to clear the hurdle for all transitioning service members leaving active duty service. Now, this is important. This is a game changer, okay, on every level, because now every single soldier, okay, coming through the active duty componency now, and we're going to try to continue
Can I
to
share?
build this.
Do you mind if I share that screen just to show the Onward
Yeah,
Ops website? Okay, let me see if I'm allowed to do that.
you do it.
Present now, and then it would be Onward Ops. All right, can you see that? Are you able to
Yeah,
see what
yes,
I'm
that's
sharing?
it.
All right, perfect. Now go ahead and continue with your explanation because I'm
So,
just
so
sharing.
this is a game changing. This is a game changing value proposition, because now, okay, we're getting every soldier 6 months to a year before they transition service. They have to
Beautiful.
fill out a 17-question biopsychosocial evaluation. And what it is this is all under the umbrella of suicide prevention. Granted, we want to help them get other resources, but at the end of the day, we're trying to create something that's never been done as preventative support for mental and behavioral health in terms of veteran suicide. So we have built, and you can see General Eastman there, and Danielle, and John, Eric, they're just wonderful, wonderful leaders, and they're doing things that have never been done before. So when we got permission from the DoD that we could get this information, and again, we have a partnership with Google, so all the stuff is done at a very, very high level in terms of encryption. All the stuff is done in the cloud. It's never on anybody's computer. So we have sponsors. Okay, sponsors aren't monetary sponsors. They're like what we would say mentor sponsors in every city in the United States, or any major metropolitan city in the United States. And these are VA trained sponsors. So the
Okay.
sponsors come in, and they don't even have to be veterans. They can actually be just patriots. People want to serve, people want to serve at this population and maybe never serve themselves, or they just love America. Well,
This
we'll
is
train them.
beautiful.
We'll train, but you just got to be an expert in your city. That's the thing. And you don't have to be a psychologist. All you got to be is somebody that knows your city and can navigate for that person coming in. So what we do is, and where are you at now? Where are you
I'm in
physically?
Southern Illinois.
Okay, so you're in Southern Illinois. So
Mm-hmm.
so we have a veteran coming out of Fort Dix or Benning or wherever, and now they want to go into the Southern Illinois region. Well, we would match them up with you, and then what happens? They get a free Google account, both sides. Get an email specifically with Onward Off sponsorship, and then basically we begin conversations a year to 6 months before I get out. And I just, again, talk once, twice a month, and it of course ramps up a little bit. I have to do the work as a service member, not you. All you're doing is giving them guidance, asking them questions. Hey, we're finding out data with those 17 questions. We have over 10,000 surveys now, and we're going to probably triple that in the months upcoming. That we're going to know everything about that individual. We know their names, we know their spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, we know their kids, what their interests are, we know their biggest fears. We're finding out that 37% of our family members today don't, or service members don't have a plan for med refills. Let's be honest, I never knew
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, as a guy that studied this thing for 3 years as a doctoral student, I had no idea. Well, now when you come up there and you say, hey, Mike, which because you're going to see this as a sponsor, you can see that I'm taking meds. That's a big thing for me. You're going to ask me the question, hey, Mike, I see you're taking meds. Is that true? Oh, yeah, I'm taking them for X, Y, and Z. Great. What's your plan for med refills? Well, I'm just going to wait till I get a job when I get out of service.
You know
And
what?
then you go,
Let's
go
ahead. I just want to shine the spotlight on the point that you're making here, Mike. I think
Yeah.
it's a beautiful point, and that is when you're in the military, especially if you're active duty, everything is kind of predefined for you. Your days are already planned and ahead of time. So there's a structure built in. It's interesting, in your own personal testimony, you talked about wanting to have structure and wanting to have discipline. And then when you're in the military, it's like it's already spoon fed to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're postulating is that there's a drop off when somebody is without your program, without Onward Ops, without the Valor Club, without your efforts, that prior to your efforts, there was just kind of like this laissez-faire, oh, I'm getting out in 6 months, but not really having any actual
Mm-hmm.
practical plans where they're going to, like, exactly where they're going to live, not just what the area that they're going to live, but
Hmm.
the actual apartment. Do they actually have a lease already set in stone? Do they already have X, Y, and Z when it comes to their meds? Do they know where they're going to go shopping, for
Hmm.
goodness sakes? Like, these are all practical considerations that they don't necessarily have to worry about, because when they're on base, like, let's say,
Hmm.
for example, they're on one of those bases there in San Antonio, there's 3 of them, and they're living on base. They literally have a DFAC that they can go to. They have their
Hmm.
own clothing already provided to them. They have their own schedule, their daily routines, everything. But what happens when that's all taken away? What
Hmm.
happens when they get out? That camaraderie that they had with Joe and Jill when they were in the barracks is
Hmm.
gone now. They're out. Now they're out living a civilian life. And all of those temptations and all of those struggles that happen in a civilian life, they really come 100% at you full speed when you actually have to, when the rubber meets pavement, because you're getting out, your boots are on the ground. Now you're a civilian,
Hmm.
and now you're looking at all these, you have bars in the area, you've got all these, girls all over the place. I'm just speaking as a guy, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
let's say it's like a 24-year-old Joe who just
Hmm.
got out, and he's a hornball full of testosterone, and now he's got all these issues that he's not taking care of, and now he wants to go hook up with some chick. Like, I'm just trying to throw this out there so whoever's listening can get the good idea that there's real problems that you're trying to solve. Now go ahead.
Well,
Just
I mean, and that was the takeaway from my work, my academic work, was that I had over 360, I think 360 surveys, and I think I interviewed, I did a did a qualitative quantitative mixed method approach, but I found that this is a failure to assimilate. This isn't PTSD in general speak. This is a failure to assimilate. This is why the village concept of being able to come into a community and live together to be able to work through this stuff and learn skill sets. So, for example, when we grabbed you or anybody else, let's just take the enlisted, military, Marine or soldier or airman, whatever, a sailor. We grabbed you at 17, 18 years of age, right? You've never lived autonomously as an adult. You might have had a car payment or something, work part-time at the pizza restaurant, whatever. But at the end of the day, you probably weren't a great student, because if you did, you probably would have been going to college, my guess, or you had very little resources to do that, okay, or
That's right.
support. So you join the military. It's a great opportunity to figure out, you're not just marking time. You're actually moving, building skills, building team camaraderie. You get the great benefits of GI Bill, you get house, loans, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a great proposition for kids. And 4 years, as we all know that are older, that's a speed bump, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's not so much, but that's what wisdom is. But at the end of the day, I found that these guys lived in the barracks. They have an MOS. 70% of them don't do what they did in their MOS when they get out, because most of them are combat arms. So that's another misnomer. They don't really have any skill sets. They don't have certifications. They don't have licensures. They don't have any of that stuff. And they come out, and then they're wondering why they struggle. They don't know how to buy groceries. They don't know how to cook food, because it was done at the chow hall. It was never, they never had to prepare it, buy it at Whole Foods Market, or they'll just go to McDonald's. We can't live like that because it's too expensive. And you need to learn how to cook, because it's better for health, and wellness overall. So that's what I found, and that's why this model that I built in the Valor Club is a comprehensive program that will help that will help I guess rebrand, for lack of a term, rebrand these service members coming in to the civilian sector much more efficiently, much more controlled. And again, what's the distance? Remember, I told you about distance to care in Los Angeles. Well,
Mm-hmm.
let's say Adam, Mike, Steve, whoever are working as they're doing an internship at Whole Cat, and then they go home after the evening, and then you go up and see a therapist at 6 p.m. with your family. You walk downstairs. I mean, are you kidding? I mean, that works. That's something that they don't just short-term modalities, particularly 8 to 12 visits, what you need to do to actually see improvement, not one or two. So yeah, they might feel good after one or two visits, but that's not really pulling the band-aid off. So at the end of the day, you're keeping them in therapy longer. You're going to have better outcome measures, right? And so that's one model. And so that was one of the things that we did in building this. So the partnerships around the community, because we also need to learn how to talk. We need to learn how to do a job interview. We need to know how to do resume support, and not just at a week's worth of tap, which is
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan. I don't think there's zero outcome measures. There's no assessments to know if they've learned anything. They just throw them through a week's worth of classes and they sign, it's a sign-in sheet. It's what it is. They just want to get out of there, and they're leaving a week later. I mean, it's not going to help them over time, and there's no
Mhm.
longitudinal collection of data to show that it's successful. An onward ops, it's going to transform it. I mean, I tell you, if they can get that tap core, that tap, they literally will have not only their current data at real time, but now offloading data. Right now, you're coming into in your case, southern Illinois, and you tell me, and going back to this thing with meds, right? So I tell you, well, I'm just going to wait till I get a job. Well, you say, Mike, I love you, but why don't you sign up for VA? Well, I didn't go to combat. I don't, really, I don't rate it. Well, no, I'm not missing my legs. No, I mean, or maybe they just don't like the brand, whatever. I'm not going to see them. I hate them. Great. Well, you get it for a year. If you have a 0% disability, you get it for a year, free meds. Why wouldn't you take that? Well, because I'll get a job in the civilian sector. Dude, you have no idea. You're going to wait probably 5, 6 months potentially for a job in the
That's
civilian
right.
sector. And then you probably got to wait another 6 months for medical insurance.
That's
I
right.
said, now you're going to start this thing way behind the starting line block. When you depart a year, you're going to, a picture of a race, you're going to start 15 minutes after the start of the gun of the race. Let's start ahead of time. Get yourself signed up. I mean, we're only seeing of the 10,000 people we've surveyed, we're getting about 17, 18% enrollment into VA. So I can tell you right now, that is a broken system. We're partnering with VA. We need to help with VA. VA needs to do this work. But for us, when they're engaged with and remember with Onward Ops, they don't have to have a sponsor. That's optional. We just have them fill out the paperwork because we want to know if there's going to be some flags on that survey. If you pop hot on that thing, you're going to get a call by a therapist. That's what's going to happen.
And when you say pop hot, you're not just referencing drugs, right? You're
No, 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 no,
talking
no.
about
I'm
like
talking. I
mental
usually use
health,
another vernacular.
physical issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say if you're flagged for high risk anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, things that are flags for suicide, you're going to be connected with a therapist or with somebody to talk
Beautiful.
to before you're out of service. And remember, you couldn't
Outstanding.
join VA until when? You were separated. Well,
That's
now
right.
we have an agreement with VA that we actually have therapists that will actually engage you. So prior to getting out, that's the option. Because people think in the civilian sector, well, isn't it one? DoD and VA are one. No, they're it's Mexico and China, or Mexico and Canada. It's completely different entities, different pipelines, different monetary system, in terms of budgets. So that's what people don't realize, that it's not a sure pathway through. Now, why is that connection to VA so important? Well, of course, it's for medical. In our case, in this case, it was medical. Let's just say meds, for example, refills. But there's a study in 2019, and I actually put this in my academic work. It was a 2021 study or 2019 study that stated that over 75%, I think it was 75%, of those that were able to successfully complete suicide, or whatever the professional political correct way of saying accomplishes suicide, 75% of them were never enrolled in VA. Now,
Wow.
I'm not the
That's an
smartest guy in the
incredible
room on
statistic,
most
Mike.
conversations, but I can tell you that is unacceptable to me. So if we can get them enrolled in that, what does that do for them? It gets them upstream with resources that they need, that they've already paid for. We've paid for collectively as a society. That now you're getting it on the upstream side. You're not getting them when they're on the backside, when they're in distress, because it's too late then. They've already self-medicated with drugs, alcohol. Once they do that, it's a
Yeah.
complex problem that is not fixable. And that's why I was telling, even homelessness in Los Angeles County, I've got 8,000 homeless vets there. 8,000, and once they're chronic drug users, you can't help them. I mean, they literally have lost track of time as we know it in terms of the day. They don't follow the law, the typical movement time that humans make in terms of getting up early, whatever in their normal job, except that they don't eat well. They've got health problems, secondary health aids, everything else that go along with it. So all that said, that when we do this, so now I'm in the system. I know who you are. I have you enrolled in VA, for example, and now I know, say, we're finding 20% of them don't have their biggest fear is food insecurity. I mean, what first world country has an issue with 20% of your population is afraid they don't have enough food to eat for the month? That to me is unacceptable. Well, it's not senior people mostly. It's younger ones, newly married people, people who are 22, 23 years old, have a couple of children. They're in the military. They've served excuse me, admirably. Now they're coming out, and now that's because you're on your survey as a sponsor. You're going to see the dashboard. You're going to see my statistical data says, "Hey, I'm food insecure. I am scared that that's the biggest one of my biggest issues." And now you'd say, "Well, let me get let's talk about this thing through." We have Texas Family Life, for example. We can get you food. You go to HEB in Texas. You take pictures of your receipts. $300 worth of groceries every month. You get that. Take a picture of it, no booze, no cigarettes, obviously. And then what we do is we restack that debit card that we give you. And we'll do that for, potentially up to 6 months. Well, guess what? Now that's off the table. Great. All right. Now what's the next thing you got? So if I can do that immediately, donors love it because now you see what they're buying, And so it's quantifiable outcomes to know, number one, that we're not just burning money on salaries, right? Or anything else that, again, becomes very detrimental to your success as a
because
nonprofit.
what you're trying to do is you're trying to differentiate yourself from the other 50,000 nonprofits.
Correct. Because I'm not trying to remember. The vision for Onward Ops is, and again, General Eastman is the guy to really talk to about this long term. But in terms of the general outcome, we want to be able to partner with every single nonprofit that's out there, right? Every nonprofit that's worth a salt that wants to partner with us to serve this population. Because if I can get them this data prior to them getting out to a local, VSO that's doing the work, what do they're living large because number one, they don't have to wait for them to call them. Now we know that, that Mike or Adam or whoever has a brain, TBI issue, and I know you're coming to San Antonio. Well, guess what? I can link you up with providers that will donate time. That now, when you get out with your family, you show up on a Monday, on Tuesday, you got a clinic visit. You're going to go meet your clinician, over at the TBI clinic. And this is out of the VA. I mean, this is something we can do because we have, all these healthcare providers want to donate time. Well, now we can specifically get you to that person way before any issues occur. But again, that's where you as a sponsor walk me through this process. What do you want to do? Well, we know that 40% of them, their biggest fear is a place to live that's affordable. Well, guess what? We got a Valor Club right here. Why don't you, let me link you up with them, and then what we can do is we can do like a three-way call or something with their admission people, or their registration people.
How many beds do they have? Mike, how many beds do they have there at the Valor Living?
Well, we're working right now. We're to build 1,400 of them, but we haven't built the vertical yet. That's in the planning right now. We're trying to finish our financing. So once that stuff goes, now I have other places I can send them. Clearly, American GI Forum has got a number of different apartments that, again, it's just a warm hand up. But if you come in and you're not going to know these things exist, it's the application and the actual being able to navigate it. That's the problem that veterans have.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I'm just throwing this out there, right? I'm using my life as a living example. So my issues manifested later in life, as stress compiled. Sure. I had more kids, more responsibility, more problems. I couldn't hold a job. That was the key indicator of my PTSD. It's why I got diagnosed in 2013, because I had rage episodes with prior bosses. I just had problems that kept coming up. And they basically deemed me unemployable at one point, and it actually came true. So I ended up going through the divorce, separation, all that kind of stuff, no custody, no visitation. I ended up getting in a car accident. I got hit head on by a drunk driver. I was homeless. So, and my uncle, who lives in San Antonio, I grew up in San Antonio, by the way. I grew up in an old neighborhood called Kirby. It was in fact, it's
Kirby. I live in Lavernia, so that's funny. I know exactly where that is.
Okay, all right. So, but Kirby is
paradise, baby, paradise.
Oh yeah, absolutely, paradise. No, it's interesting because I talked to a real estate agent down there when I was living down there for about a year while I was doing some rehab at the VA, rehab for the neck, because it re-injured an injury in my neck during the car accident. But anywho, so I found out from this real estate guy. He says, Yeah, out of all the neighborhoods in the entirety of San Antonio, Kirby is the only one that's insulated in the fact that they're always going to be poor. So I grew up in a very poor neighborhood. But anywho, let's take me for example, right? So how would I be able to, like, it, hypothetically speaking,
Sure.
if I was in that situation where I was divorced, I'm having troubles, are you able to capture folks like us that are past perhaps our prime when it comes to serving? Because it had been maybe 10, 15 years since I'd actively served. Are you able to serve that population as well?
Yeah, so the one we're doing upstream, the onward offside, is for the active duty component, right? So those
Gotcha.
people are going to separate. So when they get their DD 214, now they go into our other program, which I'm spearheading, called Veterans Onward. So Veterans Onward is a volunteer mobile force that we have around the city where we do activities. Like we have one on Friday coming up. We do one every 2 months, and we're working with the River Authority. We go down and we clean the river, the beds, in terms of the refuge, all the
Yeah.
bottles, and I mean just stuff that gets all the rain, as you know, kind of washes into there because it's a beautiful place and
Oh,
just
it's
gets
beautiful.
trashed.
Yeah.
So we go down there as a group in this case and
I'm
we
going to
clean it.
share the screen because I actually saw that on your LinkedIn. I'm going to show that to people there.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's we're really excited about it. This is our first one for 2024. So we did three or two of them last year. This is our third one. So it's just become a massive it's it's becoming too big actually. I mean it's been a great problem to have, but we're going and doing some great stuff, and what we're doing is we're trying to connect with the veterans that are already out. So what we do is we get three real population, actually four. The first one is the servicemen. We actually get active duty service members because this gets sent around the bases, and so they love to do it because they want to come in and meet people. It's about network. So
Okay.
then what we do is then we have the veterans, people like yourself and myself who have been out a little while, and some of them are looking for jobs. Some of them are looking for, I work with the veteran treatment court up here, so we're getting a lot of people that have been incarcerated. Now they're coming out, they're trying to, they have to do volunteer hours. Great, well now you got a chance to do it and meet some brothers and sisters that may be helpful to you. I got people that have companies, that own companies, that come and do it because what do they want? Talent. So guess what? They're coming in there meeting the people. They're doing soft interviews while they're picking up trash together. And then we also have family members of veterans, of not necessarily veterans, but active duty service members, because the families are all welcome too, right? Not just the veterans. And then what they do is they're actually ones that have their daughters and sons are in service now, but they've never joined themselves. But we want them a part of our tribe, right? Because they've given us their kids,
Right.
and so that's one group. And then the last group we have are young people, people who are wanting to go into the service. JROTC, they could be poolies, they could be all sorts of different people, and then they get a chance to talk to you and me, about the service. Hey, tell me about your service. What did you learn from it? They're not just getting the recruiter, the recruiter's messaging, right? We're trying to reinforce that because we want the DoD to know that we've got their back too. We want to help fill slots. They know they're not making mission. We want to help with that. So that's the last of our objectives is to help fill the front end of it, because it's really we like the infinity, the infinity figure eight. It's kind of, you enter in, you do your training, you come out, you're struggling, preventatively, you go through the process. Now you get separate. Now you become a veteran. Now you come in. Now you're mentoring the younger ones, and then it just cycles through. And
Yeah,
that's what we're building.
that's a beautiful model when you think about how to sustain any type of active military force. And I have my own ideas on that, but yeah, so because in my situation, the way that my kids would view the military is as a liability, because all they know is my dad served,
He's messed up.
he has lots of problems,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't see him anymore, we don't talk to him anymore, so they can only associate the military with a problem,
Mm-hmm.
which is tragic, because when you think about it, it was one of the foundational experiences of my life, and it's given me access
Mm-hmm.
to so many things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And now it has this kind of like illuminating stain in the back of my mind when I think of, because I didn't actually get the right treatment, and I didn't pursue it actively. I'm taking responsibility, culpability for this.
Sure.
And of course, you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah.
so let's go back to your niche. Your niche is, what you're saying is, you're trying to catch the net that you're trying to cast is for the folks that are active duty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then as the lifespan goes, the cycle, we want to pick them up at separate veterans onward. Anyway, Mike General Eastman's got the front end, the onward ops side. We've got
Gotcha.
the veterans onward on the back side. So again, it's a continuation. And the other thing that we're trying to do, let's be honest, we're trying to show the general public that we're not broken.
My God, I mean, that's the biggest thing. We all have to have service
Right?
dogs. This is about rebranding we are leaders. We run this city. This is our city. I get a ton of, and I teach as an adjunct a couple different universities, UIW and Hallmark University. It's funny because I get a lot of my students because they got to do hours. They got to do volunteer hours, and then they find out what we're doing. Most of them are vets anyway. Guess what they're at? They're they're at our event. And then what do? They talk about UIW, they talk about Hallmark. Hey brother, you need to go to this school. This is where I'm at. I'm in healthcare, masters in public health. And oh really, that's what I want to go into. It is absolutely great. And you know what? We don't care what your background is. We don't care. We don't care if you have a felony traffic issue with drugs. Well, you fixed it. You've been going to this program for a year. We don't care. That's rearview mirror stuff. We just want you to be back in the track, man. Let's go, let's go do the X, Y, and Z. Or I got a group that wants to do I'm a big bow hunter. And so we're starting an archery group. There's so many breakout groups from this. It's been a lot of fun. And we've been doing these community events too in Wilson County. That's where I live out here east of town, as you know. And I have a Wilco, it's actually called Wilco, Wilson County meetup. And we've been pulling 30, 40 people at an event. And I've only been we started in October. We do one a month. And it's just, there's so many great people here. It's awesome. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a village. And I have all these people that are in my tribe that are all sponsors. Why is that sponsorship important? Because it's the first track you have in
Yeah.
the community. You
I
can't
love
do
it.
it otherwise because there's nobody else. You're going there and navigating. If you don't have family members in those communities, listen, it's a 70% of them, 70% of them, 60%, I think is what it is, want to use a GI Bill. They want to know more about the GI Bill. Well, guess what? You're not a professor. You're not a financial aid guy. Well, guess what? But the universities, and maybe you got someone in your network that goes to a school there, that's, hey, tell me a little bit, let's do a three-way call. It is just and it doesn't take them much time. It actually, you get more out. I got to be honest with you. You actually get more out of it than they do. I've got several of them that attach to me. Let's call them once a month. I mean, it's nothing. Most of them are rank dependent. I get, officers and stuff, and they're all on their own. I mean, they just need help with VA, and you get a liaison. We have a liaison in the community that you can call. Say, hey, tell me about this VA program and this. What do you guys do? Because you're not going to be an expert, in that. You don't know what they do. That's a system in of itself, as you know. But the goal is to get ahead of them. And now what we do is we're going to be staying together. We do events during the course. We're going to scale this around the country. And at the end of the day, the community gets beautified out of the whole thing. I mean, it's a win-win. There's no stakeholder that loses anything.
I
And it
love
doesn't
this.
cost that much money. And the other thing is I'm doing a pilot for free, for some cell phones, free cell phones. I get Android phones for free. Anybody that needs one, come see me. I'll give you one. Doesn't cost you anything. It's Android 7. I got I got Chromebooks, that we're gonna build a program with that. I mean, you kidding? We're gonna connect you. We're tired of this narrative because if you don't have a phone, you can't survive. You really can't. And these are things that are important to us. We've been working with T-Mobile and some other people. I mean, they're all in, and everyone's winning from this. But again, it involves reaching out. It involves reaching out and and making yourself available. Hey, I want to be a sponsor. I've had people just come up to me, attack me with this. And they're like, listen, I want to, how do I do it fast? Because we do a 3-hour course you got to do online. It's
Mhm.
active and it's very good. And, I'm proud to say that, well, um, um, Joe Geraci, he's a researcher, PhD. We've reduced veteran suicide by almost 60% in terms of anxiety, depression, conditions leading up to, not suicide itself, because that's
Flags,
longitudinal.
right? Yeah, because that's how whenever you're doing a study in those types of situations, obviously you can't have a sample population of people who have killed themselves. So you have to do
Yeah,
a correlation,
correct.
and the correlations are such that if you have X, Y, and Z symptoms, high stress, high anxiety, high depression,
Hmm.
whatever those things are,
Sleeplessness, all
those
the other things.
symptoms, then that's what we have to go by. So you're not just coming up
Correct.
with that out of nowhere. You're looking at the actual data that
But
suggests.
who else? But
Right.
who else can do that? Nobody.
Okay.
And guess where your tail end's going to be? You're coming through our program. Even if you're out as a veteran now, you're going to get surveyed every 6 months, every year by me or one of our other researchers because we want to show this community our people don't hurt themselves because they're engaged in schools. They go to church. They have good salary. We got to know if they own a home. We have salary, we can compare. And we can do this for each city in the state. I mean, what do you think that's worth as a researcher? We're just scratching the surface, as I talked about with, cognitive architecture issues. Well,
Yeah.
now, guess what? Now we can show the DoD this program works. It's not just we're going to throw you a week's worth of coursework. We don't know how you do it at the end. We don't know if you remember anything, but we just did it. It's a check in the box. Now we have long-term information. How much do those universities would be paying for that? For their future
Oh
studies.
yeah. So anybody who's not connected with the academia side of things, look, because I can just tell you firsthand, when I was doing my PhD work at a place called Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and when it comes to data sets, I mean, if you're trying to get your doctorate in anything, you're looking to try to find, I mean, you are scouring for data sets. And you need those because it's so hard to set up a research study nowadays, because you can't really use, I mean, you can use live people, the people who are living, you can use some of the, but the constraints are so high.
Independent variables, all the other
Yes.
variables.
Oh yeah. So just getting this access to your data would be like that would be like whatever you want to call that. It would be like an oasis in the desert if I was still doing my PhD work. That would have been like, hey Mike, sign me up. I'm gonna do this. I want to do your research here.
Yeah. And again, it's for good, right? And that's the piece. It's not self-serving. We don't compete with, going back to the VSOs. We want the VSOs to be a part of this. We don't want them not to do anything though. You got to lift, and you're going to share the data. You're going to share the outcome measures that you have with people. Otherwise, we're not going to partner with you. But at the end of the day, anybody's eligible to get this stuff. Every county, every state in the country should be having their state and local veterans veteran directors at each level. We have relationships with, Washington State, California, Texas, Florida, Wisconsin, New York. We just Nevada's a new one we're going to get. Pennsylvania, we just signed up. I mean, these are game-changing relationships to the states, because they're willing to pay for this, and that's what helps us drive our operations in terms of, the paying for the people that have to do the work. And we don't have to go out and fund. We need to fundraise, obviously, like everybody else, but we're not reliant on the same buckets of money that the VSOs already are using, if that makes sense. We're not competing. There's no competition there with them. We're just here to help support the counties and have them help us with that. So again, I think this is going to change the game. I mean, we're working with the Army now. I would imagine that every branch of service will see this as a benefit. We get oddball here, oddball service members, joint bases and stuff, but mostly it's Army. And the people that are working, the board of directors are all West Point people and just phenomenal leaders, and they're very visionary. And this is, again, I've been in this space since I got out in 2016. I got to tell you, it is the most innovative program I've ever seen in the nonprofit space. Hardest though, because we've broken so many barriers. It's taken us a lot longer than what we expected. Building the dashboards through Google. I mean, we have spent a lot of money, but it's necessary in order to take us to the next level as a society. And I think that it will all be worth it. All the pain that we've all had to go through individually to make the commitment of this, because it's an entrepreneurial endeavor. There's no guarantee that it will work. I know it will, but like any endeavor, you put your blood and sweat and tears into this thing, but we have something that no one else has. That's the data. And I think that's important to not only that, but also people, I didn't highlight this, but one of the biggest shortfalls we have in San Antonio are tradespeople. Getting vocational trades. Everyone wants to go to college. Well, if I was telling a young person to go into the trades, get into the, get a job, be an electrician, be a plumber, be a pipe fitter, and you'll actually get paid while you're doing your internship and or apprenticeship at these companies. They're begging for you if you come down here, and literally knowing that, if I know you're a vocational HVAC guy or whatever, guess what? I can link you up with a company already with a sponsor. So guess what? That's a slow, soft interview for 6 months to a year. And guess what? When you're already in, 6 months from separation, now you can work on training stuff. You can take stuff online, safety, other basic foundational things. So that when you're off now on terminal, you're running, man. You're not skipping, you're sprinting to the next line, and you're making money, because that's the whole thing. We want you to be in, we need you to own a home. Owning a home is important for wealth generation. It's very, very important. And these young people don't own homes, and they don't own anything, to be honest with you, in terms of
Right.
millennials and Gen Zs. And this is our gift to them, especially our veterans, because they get the VA loan. It's a great thing. And I think we're going to show the communities that we have a very strong value proposition, and we're leaders. That's the whole
Yeah.
point.
I can tell that, when you're talking to somebody who has a passion and a vision, you can just tell, but through every fiber of word that they're saying, that there's something that you're offering that nobody else is offering. And I'm just so grateful that I stumbled upon you. I mean, I'm just so grateful that that Bob, connected us. I wanted to focus real quick here on the Valor Club USA, the living portion of this, because I think we had talked about this before, but I want to highlight this because I want to know what is your vision for the living portion of this, the transitionary experience going from active duty, potentially living on base, to then potentially having to find housing. So what is it that your vision is for the Valor Club? How many apartments are you looking at building? How much is it going to cost you? What's your prospectus on that?
Well, I appreciate you asking the question. We own the Pecan Valley Golf Course, so the old Pecan Valley, 200 acres, about half of it's in the floodplain, so you can't build anything vertically there. We have a vision of we were zoned for 1,400 units of multifamily housing for veterans. That's the objective. It's affordable housing. Okay, so it's not Section 8. It's affordable, so it's based upon their departing salary. So and they're qualified. If there is E5 and below, most of them qualify. So it'd be a significant, drop in their rents. The rents there in conjunction with their BH they get for basic allowance for housing with their 9/11 GI Bill. So we want them living with us. Again, going back to skill sets, training, talking to people. You can't drop F-bombs after other word. Society doesn't like that in service. You can't talk like that. But you'll listen to me. You won't listen to some guy at HR that's turning you in, when you're in the job situation, as I personally know, we get written up for it, because it's inciting, it's intimidating, because we just talk loud. Half of us are deaf,
people see it as a form of aggression, but when you're in the military, and it's funny that you brought this up, because only recently in my relationship with God have I been able to start working on that tongue, but it becomes part of a patronage. Like, you become part of a peer group by learning how to curse like a sailor. So I like how you transition.
Because Marines don't swear. You said sailor, so let's make sure that only the sailors swear. Marines don't swear. So yeah, it's a funny endeavor, because at the end of the day, they got to learn how to retrain themselves, right?
Right.
We call it rebranding, right? I like the term rebranding, because we're going to help them. We're going to help them really thrive, not just survive, but thrive. So the goal is they're going to come and live with us. Now, the homes that we have, the multifamilies that we have, multitude of different sizes, from 1 bedroom to 3 bedroom, depending on sizes. And we'll have some single families that will be built on that, probably in duplexes type models. But the idea behind it is they're going to lease those things. They're not going to buy them from us. We don't want them to buy them. We want them to lease them, figure out where they want to live. Because like any city, you go in there, we want you to go to school. We want you to be able to do something, and we're trying to build a community around it with a Montessori school. I've got a Communicare that's interested in building a medical facility there, like an larger urgent care, and then of course grow that as I'm not building all 1,400 at one time. Actually, they'll be done in 324 unit pods. But that's how we're going to break this thing down. I got a VA satellite across the street. I mean, literally, you walk to it. Eliminating barriers. I'm done with it. I'm done with the barriers.
I love it.
It doesn't work. And then put the providers there on site, whether it's mental behavioral health, maybe it's just resume support. I want to bring VSOs. Park your tail in a hoteling office right here. Talk about do your program. I do it on our facility. I don't care. I don't provide it myself. I can't do everything, but I can provide the housing.
You have a very leadership. When I think about leadership, and I'm thinking about how this applies from the military, as an officer, you have to try to coordinate logistics. And I think that's part of what I see in the thread and the fiber of what you're offering is you're offering housing, you're offering access to care, you're offering groceries, you're offering everything, but you're doing it in a preventative way, not just like, oh, hey, you're behind the 8 ball. Or, oh man, I don't know how much I can help you. You're looking at taking care of things before they happen. And I think that's I think that's where we need to be at when it comes to veterans issues. And this, if your niche is transitioning veterans, this is a really good model. And it's interesting you bring this up because I don't know how much of a history buff you are, but if you think about the Roman legionaries, right? They actually, when they were getting towards the end of their retirement, when it came to the Roman soldiers, often you found these things where you had these little villages that would pop up out of nowhere, and they would just be the cohort. It would be the cohort of these soldiers that would end up building their own villages together. And so it was interesting when I came across that on YouTube. I immediately thought, oh, that's Mike McDowell. That's exactly what you're doing, is you're essentially creating a cohort of people who are going to be able to live near each other to get your life together, get your career going, get your feet off the ground, get your feet on the, get yourself on your life, basically get your life together and transition. I just love your ideas. I love this plan. So what's your perspective?
Well, we don't want them, and remember, we don't want them there forever. We just want you there taking on home. And when you're ready for that, right?
Yeah.
And then buy some property. I mean, that's the American dream. Oh, you got to own a home. You can't build wealth without one.
Yeah. Yep. So how long so Valor Club USA, I've already shown that on the channel or on the video. How much are you guys looking to raise, and what's your timeline on how long you're looking out?
Well, that's the $1 million question, right? Because the cost of capital has killed us. We initially started this in 2020. Well, 2018, 19 is when we started. 2020 went through COVID, so everything shut down. And then, of course, we went through this recessionary period, whether or not arguably it's a recession or not. The cost of capital is just killing us right now. So that's been really the challenging piece. Otherwise, we'd have had this thing built, 3 years ago. So again, the timeline, we're trying to wrap up some financing now. We've been working with a couple different partners. The land, we're going to have developers actually build the vertical, so they'll actually own it. But then the city, we work with the city, so it's affordable housing with the trust. So they're all on board, all the elected leaders. I mean, San Antonio, if you're going to happen, it's going to happen, right? I mean, this is the place to do it as Military City USA. So,
oh heck yeah.
But again, it's about a $380 million endeavor as we see it. Not to mention the revenue generation it would build potentially with retail space, commercial retail that we'll have as well. We want to build restaurants and other types of event centers because we want recreation. It's an important piece of our experience as family members. So then we'd like to scale it.
You're going to want to have a gym. You're going to want to have a rec center. You're going to want to have, I mean, I see this thing. I just see it. I see it in my head.
And let's be honest, let's look at it a step higher. Of course, we're looking at it from the veteran eyeball grade. That's at 5,000 feet. But let's look at 10,000 feet. What's it going to do to our community in San Antonio? I can tell you right now with just a BH and what we charge for rent, because they're getting $1,700 a month. Just do them fat math. $1,700 a month times 1,400 people. Okay, you're bringing in $28 million a year. Okay, just in income rate. That's nothing the city has done. All they're doing is getting that money. They're the development. Obviously, the money is circulating through DoD funding into San Antonio. How much food does each of those people buy? How many clothes will they buy? Okay, they'll also be sending their kids to school, right? Involved in programming, education. They're going to be buying cars. They're going to ultimately buy a house. They're going to need startup capital from banking partners.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going? Everybody wins. And we're building this on the southeast side. So it's an area that used to be very, very nice. It's been very distressed. Well, guess what? We can clean up that whole community. And we can scale this around the country. We don't need to be in the richest part of town. I mean, that's the biggest myth that people have because the cost is so high with dirt. We want to go into old places and other neighborhoods around cities. You give us certain amounts of land and we'll transform it. We'll bring people in there that have
absolutely.
money.
Absolutely.
We'll clean it up.
Yeah.
So that's where my vision is on this.
So are you thinking, I want to make sure I understand. So your takeover, your world domination plan is
I'm just trying to own San Antonio right now, but I like the vision.
I love it, dude. I love
this. Military dudes talking about.
I know. Listen. That's how we work. It's like the game of Risk. Like we want to take over this part and we want to take this part. It's just how it is. That's how we think. It is.
Absolutely.
It is. So, so San Antonio is a really thriving area. It's a beautiful area. If you're not familiar with it, whoever's watching this, San Antonio itself was actually a relatively small area when it started out, right around there, around the Alamo, and it has just exploded.
Mm.
I mean, after the COVID-19, people started moving out of California and Pennsylvania and Maryland and New York, and I mean, it is hustling and bustling down there in San Antonio now. I mean, when I was down there, I was driving a ride share, and it's busy. I mean, it's busy, especially this time of the year down there. I mean, you've got everything. You've got the rodeo, you got the zoos, you got the circuses, I mean, it's just a really beautiful area. So I think you're definitely in a really great spot. My question to you is, if San Antonio is your focus and this is your main goal right now, are you looking to try to replicate this same template in areas that are surrounding bases in the United States? So like near Fort Campbell or near Fort wherever, around in Missouri, Georgia, because there's the active military bases of California and Georgia and all that kind of stuff. Is that where you're trying to develop this same type of program?
Well, yeah, we can look at the data. The onward opposite, the data we're getting from the 10,000 people, they're going to Texas, they're going to Northern California, they're going to Florida, they're going to, what was the other ones? They're going, I don't have it right in front of me, but we know exactly, we can target areas that are that way. And then we want the cities to come in and see this model. Bring your veteran leadership out of each city, come in and see us, model it. We'll replicate it. You just create a program where we can get land enough to do it. Because at the end of the day, this has to make money. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I love nonprofits. I get it. But the thing is, you can't build something this big as a nonprofit. You have to have profitability in this model, because otherwise developers won't do it.
Well, you're talking about on the tail end, it's profitability, because when you're centralizing somebody, you're literally creating economy.
Yeah.
By putting the castle there, because like in the medieval ages, in order for somebody to build a kingdom, you literally built the castle and then everything else kind of formed in around it. And so that's that same type of concept. You're building the castle and then everything else is going to center around it. You're going to have grocery stores that are going to pop up. You're going to have all sorts of entertainment and socials and everything, drinks.
But we
food,
also want to
industry.
build it. But if you look at a planning venue, planning, if you're doing a dot mate, or you're going to do a scatter plot with potential employers, right? You don't want to build this thing in the nicest neighborhood, because the thing is I don't want them, and I love my brothers and sisters, I don't want you there long term, as we've talked about. I want you there with a purpose, because if it's too nice, like anything else, you don't want the in-laws to be able to stay too long, right? Benjamin Franklin, like that and fish, so the idea, and I love my brothers and sisters, but listen, it's going to be a safe place, a nice place. Okay, but it's not going to have crown molding. It's not going to have this stuff. It's going to be a place where you can have an office in there, a study group, whatever. You can walk downstairs, go to the entertainment room or the, gaming room or whatever all these young kids want. Go down and work out, get on the pool, whatever, hang out. But at the end of the day, we want it to be built around commercial and industrial spacing, in terms of, so you can take a bicycle or a small bus ride and roll down to your internship.
Yeah.
Or, we want it to be where people work. We don't want it to be where people live necessarily. I mean, you want to find that sweet spot, but we want it next to universities, or next to education, vocational training centers. Hell, we'll put training centers literally on the site. We're trying to do that now with a couple different vocational services.
Well, I mean, nowadays
you can walk over there.
Right. Nowadays, you don't even actually have to step foot in a university because of the distance education. So if you just happen to have
center,
right.
all that.
Yeah. As long as you have internet access, you have a laptop or a Chromebook, like you said, with whatever you're offering there. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Mike, I love this idea. I mean, I'm just fascinated by this concept that you've really extracted from something that's happened in history already. And then you're compounding this with this idea of getting people in, transitioning them out of the military, getting them access to sponsors. So this sponsorship thing, I just want to make sure I understand this sponsorship program. You don't have to be a veteran yourself in order to be a sponsor, right? There's a 3-hour educationary program that you can access. So can you go ahead and direct people, tell them where they need to go to find this? Because I'll share the screen with you while you do it. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So go to Onward Ops and push on become a sponsor. and click on that tab, and then it'll run you through a little pathway, and it'll want to learn more about you and where you live, et cetera, et cetera. And then it'll go to Danielle Bracco. She's our operations director, and she's going to, or her staff, Christine, they're awesome. And then give them a call if you have any questions. They're always available, and just learn more. The idea behind it is, again, you don't have to be a veteran, you don't have to be a military member. In fact, you got to be out a year before you can become a sponsor. Some sponsors want to come in too early, but we want them to kind of get their feet wet for a year, and then go to onwardops.org as he showed you showed on that screen, and then become a sponsor, and they'll push back information to you as far as available training periods. It's on your convenience, obviously. They're live trainings, so they're good. They're not just something I think that they record, because there's a lot of role playing. You do a lot of stuff, hard questioning. It's as an educational curriculum developer, I can tell you it's very well developed, and it's very inside. I took the course, it was great. But I will tell you, you got to ask some hard questions, because there's times when you'll get on that phone with them, and times like, hey, you sound kind of down,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, do you have a plan for hurting yourself? Have you thought about that?
Yeah.
From 0 to 10, what would you rank
Yep.
yourself right now? I mean, you're like, that's not an easy conversation to have. And so you're like, well, maybe 2 or 3. Okay. Oh man, I'm sorry you feel like that. Well, guess what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to call, we have a 24-hour service that we call, and let's do a 3-way call. Would you mind if we do that? I'll be right here with you. I'll do it with you. And then when you want me to step off, I'll step off. And then you guys can keep talking and set up a plan. If you want to talk about personal stuff I don't need to know about, then I'll step off, brother. That's the handoff, man. That's what works.
Yeah.
Not freaking call this number on your own. It doesn't. That's why these Google things are so great with Google as our partners. Google, we use Google Meet. We'll do a 3-way call on this. This is how we talk.
Well,
and you're in another state.
No, you're right. And I'm going to add this to that. I want to add a little bit of my own personal experience to that. When I was actively suicidal, this is when I was still married and was living with the family, and I was about to lose my house. I couldn't afford it because I lost my job. I couldn't work.
Yeah.
And when I called the crisis line, the veterans crisis line, and I don't want to poo-poo anything. I try to speak life into things, because I believe that's what the scripture tells us, is to speak life into things. But there's also an element of speaking truth to what's not necessarily working. And so when I called the veterans crisis line, the issue that I had with the veterans crisis line is you get a new person every time you talk to them. And when you're in the state of crisis, it's so hard to try to explain the context behind the issues that you're experiencing, because when you're in crisis, you're already at the point of no return. You're already at the point where you have tried to, especially for me, somebody who tried to hide those problems for 13 years, and coped in so many different ways prior leading up to that. So to try to explain all your extenuating circumstances in that moment in time,
I know.
then for that moment in time, maybe they talk you down, and they get you, they send a letter. So what they did in my situation is they send a message to a local community alert agency, and then there was like something that they sent a message to the VA, but it was so fragmented that like my VA team didn't really understand what was going on, and I had to be the one to try to explain to them everything. And then what happens is when you tell them that you called the crisis line, and now they have to respond at a certain time, it almost creates this vacuum of distress that it puts people under, not just the person that's calling, but it doesn't seem to me that the kinks are worked out when it comes to the veterans crisis line, so that there's like an immediate response. And I will say this, the other problem is that they're not close to you. They're just this person on the phone that's answering your crisis call. And that's why I love this idea that you're talking about when it comes to sponsorship and it comes to developing a relationship, because you want to develop a relationship with somebody ahead of time. Like, I love this idea of your sponsorship program, because you want to develop a certain continuity with somebody before you just hand them off to somebody else. It's the difference between cold calling somebody and actually building a relationship with somebody and then offering them something. To me, it just makes sense that why your program seems to be something that has a great idea and a concept behind it is there's a human aspect to it that makes you feel connected to another human being. And I love it. I just love what you're offering, Mike. What are your thoughts about it? I'm just going to ask you that before we get going here, because I know we only scheduled up until 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I just want to give you that. What are your thoughts about the difference between the Veterans Crisis Line and what you're offering as far as the sponsorship through Onward Ops?
Well, I mean, they're a particular organization, right? And and as you and I both know, they're only as good as their leadership, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is are they networked? You know, there's a lot of organizations that you call VSOs that are very reputable. I won't tell you the names, but you call them, you know, and you look at their Form 990 and you look at their, we've serviced, I don't know, 20,000, 20,000 different service members to different. I'm like, well, okay, great. That's a great 10,000 foot stat. But my question as a basic guy with common sense, what's the status of them? What happened to them? Well, we don't really know. And it's like, no, that isn't word. It's not acceptable to me. And that's the thing is we just pass this buck. Oh, call this number. Oh, you call this number. Here's your 6-part folder coming out of DOD, coming out of the DOD with your transition folder. All your numbers you need, man, they're right here. And you're not on, dude. I just want to talk to somebody. I don't care. I just need someone with some advice. I'm not saying I need to go talk to the man or something, but it's like, is this out of the ordinary? Me not getting a job for 3-4 months afterwards? I mean, I feel like a loser. I've been applying and I don't even get interviews now.
That's right.
Am I doing something wrong? That's the push, man. And that's where Bill Buck and ETS sponsors, that's the whole thing. This whole thing started as ETS sponsors. It was to build sponsors around the country. That was the whole thing. And then Onward Ops built off that. And then of course, veteran, because remember, as a sponsor, you separate after the EAS or ETS, EAS, depending on what service you're in. Then you get your DDC 14. You're no longer in Onward Ops. You graduate. So that's why the handoff to Veterans Onward is so critically important. And again, you may not need something now. To your point, this stuff doesn't manifest itself immediately after separation. The most dangerous, we know this is called the deadly gap, is from separation to 1 year. That we know that is the highest correlation of suicide in that, or at least actions thereof, in that first 12 months. We know that. That's why this program will work. But again, sometimes it doesn't manifest itself 3 years later, as you know, because again, you have to hit crisis in order for it to be exacerbated, these conditions, depression, anxiety, all the other stuff. And again, if you're self-medicating with alcohol, guess what? It's a depressive condition with more depressive, substance. Guess what? Now you're wondering why you're hurting yourself. I mean, I'm so done, brother. I'm so done. I've had a friend of mine, Corey, hanged himself over Memorial Day weekend. I lost my Scout Observer at my FO Scout, my 0861.
I'm sorry to hear that, brother. I'm really sorry to hear that, man.
Well, and Lance Corporal Berkeley. I mean, I get very emotional because I'm sick and I'm tired of it. I'm done talking about it, and I'm done. Everyone just kind of speeding off this building, and their own nonprofits based on the conditions of sadness and depressive conditions, and they're not framed right. They're not framed right. It's not going to get better this way. We have 50,000 nonprofits. Why is it that we have 50,000 nonprofits in the veteran space since 2001, and the suicide level's gotten worse? Tell me why that happens. Because it's not framed right. We can frame it preventatively to keep them from going on the streets. How much money is that going to save each city in the country to not have a homeless population of veterans? And guess who you can also do with this? Let me just tell you a little secret, okay? You can replicate this for incarcerated people. You could bring them out and put them in housing, in job training, etc., and housing. Because what are they going to do? As a human condition, they go back to where they came from, with the influences they have nothing to lose, everything to, and now, guess what? Now you're wondering why the recidivism rate is so pathetic. Well, that's the reason. They don't have the structure. We're going to continue this. But again, you can change sociological conditions. But again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but it's going to cost some money. And the cities have to buy into this because it's extremely expensive. But up front, but then again, the city's going to, in our case, the city's going to get the land back after 15, 20 years, whatever we agreed to. And so again, the city's going to get the facility, in the end. So anyway.
Well, no, listen, I get it. And to try to encapsulate this conversation as much as possible, because it's been a terrific conversation. I really enjoy your company, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your willingness to share your emotions, because it's clearly a passion of yours, and it's a passion of mine as well. And I'll probably shed a few tears after this podcast, just because of my own personal connection with this issue. I've been suicidal. I've had suicidal depression for a number of years now, and there's veterans out there that are, hopefully there's a veteran or two that'll watch this episode, and they'll understand that there's brothers in arms out there that we are trying to raise the flag for other veterans out there, brothers and sisters of our armed forces, that are trying to do something about this, and to not give up, that there's hope for the future. And I wanted to share this episode with everybody, to show that there are competent people out there that are pushing forward an agenda that's not based off of just trying to get donations. Because that's one of the evil forces in this world, is money. It's just a reality. We all have to operate off of the dollar somehow. And there are some unfortunate organizations that do take advantage of their 501c3 status, or whatever that is, and say that they serve veterans, but don't necessarily actually serve them in a comprehensive way. And what you're suggesting is a comprehensive program. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a comprehensive program to get people transitioned out of the military, to get their feet on the ground, to get their life in order, so that they can learn the skills that they need to learn, so that they can live an actually successful civilian life. Like you said, you want them to own a home, you want them to learn these things. And I will share with you that even for veterans like me, people who are out of the service, there are organizations out there, and I will share one of them with you, Mike. It's called Warrior Rising, and they're a entrepreneurship program that is specific for veterans like me who have disabilities, and they run you through this program. They have monthly mentorship calls. They have all sorts of stuff like that. So there are programs out there like what you're suggesting, Onward Ops, Living Valor Club, the Warrior Rising veteran. Because if you are a veteran and you want to become an entrepreneur, it doesn't just happen overnight, right? And it's easy. And I will tell you that suicide is real. And let's take, for example, if you have a veteran who did happen to have some financial stability and they did save some money. Well, what happens if they started a business and then that business fails? Do you know what I'm saying?
Extremely stressful.
It creates a cycle of stress. So to have a mentorship group, or a group of people who are doing the same things together, whether it's business, or whether it's taking classes, or whether it's transitioning out of the military, we want to try to create this peer group of people that are going forward in life together.
The network. I mean, the network is what you pay for to go to. I went to USC. Why did I go to USC? Well, I went to USC because there's a lot more money. But I'll tell you what, it's the network. It's Stanford, Harvard, all these other schools. That's why you go, and that's why the Veterans Onward. Yeah, you're not going to go to college necessarily right away. If someone hasn't been to school before they got out, and now you're that might be a financial partner for you for the new idea. That's the whole thing. It's connectedness to other people. And let's be honest, because we're a 501c4 now. That's the other thing too about us, a little bit different, because we're a social change organization. But one of the things that I'm very excited about when we start rolling this thing out is the visibility. It's the one thing we can unify in a polarized society that we have politically. It's the one thing, veterans, that we can all agree upon across the board. And so anyways, and then I challenge them, say, listen, if you want to put some money into something and you want to invest in Onward Ops, the Valor Club, whatever, Veterans Onward, now's your chance to show yourself, to be a partner, be a financial partner. But don't just send money, send yourself, send a representation. I want to fill your company full of veterans. I mean, that's the other problem, is they don't know how to get us. Guess what? I will pipeline veteran talent to you, but you got to also put something up on the front end. I'm not doing this by myself. And that's one of the things that this is going to take a village. And if we can do this together, we can change the entire enterprise. And that's what I'm excited to do. So anyway, but I appreciate, the opportunity to come on today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to seeing and staying in connection with you, and just seeing how this blossoms, and to just offer prayers. I ask people who are going to watch this video to offer your prayers up, your sincere prayers up for Mike McDowell, for your organizations, for your efforts, for Onward Ops, Living Valor Club, and what was the last
Veterans
one?
Onward.
Veterans Onward. So if they want to get in contact with you, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get your contact information. Is it okay if I include that into the description of the video?
Give me a call, give me an email, and I'll get back with you. And like I say, I'm not the 50-pound brain in the group. I'm just the guy trying to put everything together. So again, if you have a better idea or something that works better, or you want to partner with us, get in touch with me. I call everybody back or email them back. I am not one of those guys, and I need help, and we can do this together. There's much more pie to get, but it's gonna take something. We got to change it. We have to. If we don't disrupt the system, we'll never fix it. So anyway, to your point. So
no,
anyway.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. God bless you, Mike. I'm just so grateful for you. Hey, have fun with your Bazura. Is it Bazura Bash?
Yeah, Bash your bat. Yeah, it's a big trash thing. We're competing with other. We picked over 500 pounds of trash last time we did this, so it was pretty crazy. I mean, it's really and it's all environmentally focused, so it's really cool.
Man,
if you like the environment, it's really, that's where Bob came down to as well. I got to tell you, I am the luckiest guy in America. I get to meet. I'm so blessed to know some of these people. It's just I just smile, in terms of joy in my job, and just really lucky. So I'll leave it with that. So.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless you, Mike, and I'll be in touch with you.
Thanks, brother. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.